Alright, another draft physics video presentation and such. Comments, there's only two of them really, so we'll see if we make a whole video out of 2 comments. There's always other stuff, peripheral things worthy of discussion. I always play a little bit of a Bill Gates video or something, who knows. So anyway, this was an email, and so we previously made a comment, and this is a follow-up. Alright, let me expand a bit on question 5. Don't remember it, but whatever. It is apparent that iron consists of much less elemental particles than xenon. Iron has 56, xenon has 131. Right, fine. Nucleons, which isn't a real concept. I don't accept the word nucleon. There's no such frickin' animal. Which makes the density of iron 7.9 grams per cubic centimeter, while xenon is 5.9 grams per cubic centimeters. Fine, who cares? But anyway, let's continue. Which, if I get you correctly, in your model means that xenon shall be pushed towards iron more than the other way around, since it has more electrons, protons, neutrons than iron, and thus gets hit by more force bits. Alright, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I'm surprised other scientists don't say it. There's something fundamentally wrong with Newton's equation, in the sense that he combines the two forces, essentially. Alright, he's basically saying, what's a net effect of gravity? And you have to understand gravity as something you make. Okay, I'm creating a gravitational change. So this is another part of the language that's kind of screwed up, is you say gravity, we call it one thing, and the effect is really the absence of something. So it's like saying light when you mean shadow, all right, or high intensity versus low intensity. This is an intensity thing. Okay, it's how much are you affecting a field that already pre-exists. So if you think of it in those terms, and those are the terms that the actual universe works in, is that there is an amount of pressure, and you can change the amount of pressure by being in a field. You absorb some of the pressure by moving, blah 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 blah, and therefore you create a change in the field. Now, you're being affected by other things that are changing the field. So how you get affected by gravity is different than what the gravity that you're producing. That is, the change you are being affected by is produced by something else, and the change that affects something else is caused by how you affect the field. So it really can't be understood as just one thing. Okay, so you have to understand that your tiny little atoms, each individual electron and proton, are being affected by gravity. So how you're affected by gravity is a nuclear function. The gravity you produce is obviously a byproduct of the collection of atoms. Your collection has a net effect on the field. The individual ones aren't doing so much, so to speak. I mean, yes, the individual electrons and protons moving is what's absorbing the energy, but clearly what we would say the object's effect on the field is going to be the whole object, not the little bits. So the Earth, the atoms of the Earth are pulled towards the sun, pulled by the absence of the pressure created by the sun absorbing energy. And then the vice versa is the Earth as a whole collective creates a field of gravity. That is, without all the atoms, you can't sit on the surface and be affected by 10 meters per second per second. It's not going to happen. From each individual atom isn't producing all of that gravity. It requires the whole collective to produce that gravity. Alright, so having gotten that out of the way, you have to understand that your density is important in terms of what field how you're affecting the field, but it has nothing to do with how you're affected by something else's gravity. All the little bits just couldn't care less, okay, what the density of the object that changed the field is. All they care about is the change in the field. So if I made the Earth smaller, denser, it wouldn't change its orbit any, Now, it would change its surface because now I'm going from a surface this far away from the center to a surface this far away from the center. Obviously, that would change the surface gravity, but it wouldn't change the gravity in any one particular location. So if I stayed this far from the center of gravity, it doesn't matter how big or small I make something. So if I'm on the surface of the sun and then I make the sun the size of a pea with the same mass, I'll be in exactly the same amount of gravity, which is 80 meters per second per second. Surprisingly, not that much bigger than Earth gravity. When you think of the mass of the sun, it's a million times more massive, and yet the gravity's only 8 times more. That's because the sun doesn't have any density. It's very loosely affiliated atoms. They're not as close together. The atomic bits, the electrons and protons, aren't as dense. But if I made them denser and I stayed in the same distance from the center of the gravity, I would still be in exactly the same amount of gravity. Alright, so I'll read the rest of this, but that should tell you what the right answers are. Which, if I get you correctly in your model, I mean, it's not that complicated a model, but whatever, means that Xeon shall be pushed. It's just, it's just not the right language. So if you want a specific and accurate answer, we can't talk about gravity as being something created. Okay, we're creating gravity. We're creating a change in the gravitational field. Okay, it's a pre-existing pressure, and we're changing the pressure. We're increasing or decreasing pressure. Alright, pushed towards the iron more than the other way around, since it's more electrons, protons, and neutrons than iron. Obviously, if you have two objects and one is denser than the other object, and you have this set distance, they're apart from each other, I'm just saying it doesn't matter how much you expand and contract them, okay? If their distance is going to remain the same and their mass is going to remain the same, it doesn't matter how much of this crap you do about making them bigger and smaller. Alright, in terms of denser or less dense. And it's kind of an obvious, in the sense that if I made something more dense, you can visualize it going this way, but it really is going this way, which means some matter goes further away from you, but some matter gets closer to you, and they cancel each other out. So for every bit that gets closer to you, there's a bit that gets further away from you. Alright. Electrons, protons, it gets hit by more force bits. However, despite Xeon being more elementary particles, it is lighter. Again, lighter is not exactly the right terminology to be using when you want to just say plainly the atomic particles are more compact, are less compact. So in the case of Xeon, the atomic particles, the atoms are bigger. There's more space between the atomic particles. That is why I still need more explanation on this to get aligned with your model. Well, I just don't. This is their model. This is any model of gravity. Follows these rules, so it's just the way it is. Obviously, I would argue that it's perfectly consistent with what my model would produce. It's what Mach gravity would produce. Again, Mach gravity is the concept that the force is a push force. It's external to the objects. It pre-exists the objects. The objects aren't necessary for the pressure to exist, the force, and all the objects do is change the amount of force in a particular direction. That's what gravity is. Gravity isn't something you create. Gravity is a change you make. Okay. Yeah. Alright. On to comment number 2. Alright. Dustin Buck. I read the first 2 sentences of this, found it to be snarky, and said, okay, here we go. So, should be something in here to argue with. What is the evidence for any real particles? So again, he's saying, He doesn't really understand the mission here. You're not going to have a videotape of either ether or particles. The smallest things in the universe are going to remain invisible because there's nothing we can bounce off of them. We can't have an interaction with them in any kind of subtle or passive way that will reveal any details about them, like their velocity or their momentum or their direction or any of this other stuff, because it's like looking at a Volkswagen by crashing Volkswagens into Volkswagens. You will not be able to resolve what a Volkswagen looks like by doing that, or seeing a tennis ball by throwing tennis balls at it. It won't work. So this is the project here is like a detective story, a Columbo episode, and the idea is you have little chunks of evidence and you put them together in a coherent way where all the little dots connect and it all adds up to one thing, and there really isn't any other possible theory that can work except for this one theory. Oy. All right, so I would say there is plenty of evidence for particles, in the sense that there's the evidence that the photons arrive as a clump. You could say the double slit experiment with single photons is pretty good evidence of particles. Certainly lots of electron experiments. Electrons seem pretty clumpy. They arrive at the phosphorescent screen on the cart in a particular way. The photons created by LEDs, a certain amount of energy goes in, a certain amount of photons come out reliably, dependably, in terms of clumps of energy and momentum. So there are pieces of evidence of clumps. Now, this idea that you want me to defend particle physics, well, they're not particle physicists, as I've said repeatedly in videos. So this is a straw man argument that somehow I have to talk about the Hadron Collider and the bullshit they say they've seen as particles. Yes, that's all crap, as I've plainly stated. They see a particle moving too fast based on, protons can't go that fast. Protons will not go that fast through a quarter inch of lead or some other kind of bullshit. And then they say, well, we have to call it something new. So now it's a positron. Bullshit. Even the Hadron Collider, we don't see the actual particles. Well, that's right. And you don't see them as actual particles in the sense that they don't last long enough for you to really give them a name. I mean, if your baby died, 4 milliseconds after it was born, I don't think you'd waste any time planning for its college education. Anyway, we don't see the actual particles. All we see are the pathways they are cut out of the empty space, as you call it. Well, clearly we don't see them in empty space. We see the damage they do in a medium, an actual, cloud chamber, or what's the other one they call it? Whatever the other chamber is, but it's a medium that we can see their trail of destruction, like a little tornado. We can see its little path, from a viewpoint, and that's pretty good evidence of the existence of something. When it cuts a path right through something, it's a pretty good evidence of something. You want to play this game that it's a perturbation through the forest, the tornado. This whole thing, this obsession with ether, when everything we see, all right? I mean, there's nothing ether-like about a boulder rolling down a hill and crushing a building. No medium required, blah, blah, blah. Everything in space is clearly, you throw the wrench, you drop your wrench in space, and it continues to orbit around. It becomes a missile. Everything about space is craters and, impacts and clumps, and there's just no evidence of any necessity for mediums for things to get around, except in this stupid little wet example. I mean, do people wet your pants so often that you're just obsessed with water mediums or something? I just don't understand this obsession when everything else is very clumpy. Anyway. All right, empty space, as you call it. Yeah, that's right. I claim there's something called nothing and something called something. Gee, what a bizarre idea. I mean, fuck you. Another thing is your RIP people, RIP people, for never defining things. I don't know. Do I do that? I think Bill Gates is obsessed with these stupid definitions. No, I sit there and rip people for using baby talk. okay, to have a conversation about something technical, like the stuff. Just even saying something like bent space, when that only works in 2 dimensions, it's a nonsense analogy. So my arguments are very specific, and you're a weasel and a cunt and a pukey little lying piece of shit to sit there and imply without any evidence again. So I keep claiming, what you people never produce any quotes. You never produce this evidence of where I've done any of the crap you claim I've done. So why don't you sit there and post one of my critiques, okay, one of my claims against them, and show how that's preposterous or that's wrong. Can you do that, weasel liar? Ugh. Anyway. So what is energy? Well, I've told you 4 million times what energy is. Energy's when you take this field, okay, that exists, and it has a certain amount of momentum in it, and it's randomized, and you unrandomize it, okay? You unbalance it. So you create a change in it. You make something go this way instead of that way. That means it's a consequence for the thing over here, and it's a consequence for the thing over here, and that's called energy, because now there's going to be an imbalance, because now it's not randomized anymore. Now it's not proportional, because you've created a mechanism that creates a disproportion. And that's what we call energy. So something that reveals an imbalance, all right, is what we call energy. But the energy, if you want to get specific about it, is in every one of the little particles moving the speed of light. That's the source of the energy. Nothing moves, okay, until you have that stuff moving. And that stuff doesn't die. It can only get absorbed and readmitted. And that's a pretty simple way to understand it, right? So the model I've given you in a perfectly simple analogy. I've given you this simple analogy. There's an ocean with rowers in it, okay? An ocean of nothing, and the rowers swim in it. They have momentum, and they go the speed of light. And then there's boats, and if they jump in the boat, the equal and opposite rower jumps out of the boat. It's that simple. So all the little rowing is conserved. You can never kill a rower. You can never make a rower into some other kind of rower. All you can do is exchange rowers, technically. And through that process, you can have the appearance of a change of direction. And that's it. The appearance of. But as a practical matter, nothing changes except the fact that these rowers come in 2 kinds of charge, and that there's 2 kinds of boats. So there's 2 kinds of boats and 2 kinds of rowers, and there's a subtle difference between how the rowers behave when they encounter one of the 2 kinds of boats. So I've made it that simple. And here you are playing this game. I haven't explained what energy is. Of course I have. Alright, what is quanta? Quanta's a rower, fuckhead. Retard. A bit of force. So, I mean, I've been over that so many times. This is so disingenuous. You're such a fucking piece of lying shit to sit there and play a game like I haven't answered that question 100 times, 200 times in these videos. At least 200 times. Everything you preach has to do with faith. It has to do with no such thing whatsoever. It has to do with a rational explanation for magnetism. So once again, I'll put you on. Why don't you answer one of my questions, or why don't you provide me the evidence you think you have? So why don't you post to me a link to a description of magnetism that is more coherent, more complete, and more simple than the one I've provided. So go to my magnetism video in the subject videos, and why don't you post to me a competing video that explains magnetism in any kind of rational way at all. Go ahead. Show me what you think the truth is, cunt. You pussy. Alright, anyway. Everything you preach has to do with faith. So there's no faith involved. There's me giving you a simple explanation for how the mechanical universe works. Okay, no tricks, no spooky action, no wooey action, no nothing dramatic needed besides swimmers and boats. Wow. How amazing. I'm saying there's swimmers and boats in the universe. How bizarre. Fuck you. without any proof at all. So again, the proof is in the fact that it fits all the evidence. So why don't you show me an experiment that doesn't fit? And let's make it an experiment, of course, that you even have some knowledge of how all the mechanical parts even work, right? Because all the regular experiments, that is, all the experiments within our technical means, not the experiments that claim to measure 1/10,000th of the distance of a proton, the width of a proton. let's forget about those stupid experiments and just play with the ones that have some sort of realistic expectation that they can actually measure what they claim to be measuring. And show me one experiment that's inconsistent with my theory. You piece of shit liar. Alright, without any proof at all. So again, the proof is never going to be a videotape of the murder. The proof is going to be, hey, isn't it a weird coincidence that OJ cuts his finger, almost hacks it off, the very night his wife's head falls off? Huh, coincidence. Bloody gloves, DNA all over the place. Bruno Mali, size 14, Bruno Mali footprints in blood on the sidewalk. So you add up the evidence, and it all points one way, idiot. All right. Without any proof at all. So again, there's plenty of proof, plenty of evidence. The evidence is always going to be a little bit circumstantial because, again, what we're describing will never have a videotape of it. We can only simulate it. We can only create models of it, and that's all there is, asshole. You expect people to believe there really is something sexist, huh? Even though we can't. What does that have to do with this? Sexiest. Even though we can't measure it. Something is, whatever that is, even though we can't measure it. So again, we can measure it. We can measure single photon impacts. We can measure electron momentum, how far an electron flies off of a charge. We can measure lots of things. So this pretense that we don't have any evidence is nonsense. That is a religion. So again, there's no religion in my theory, okay? There's obviously no complex entity created. There's absolutely no dogma. I'm not sitting there just saying believe it because I tell you so, or believe it because I talk to God, or believe it because I believe it. I'm just saying here's a rational explanation of the simple mechanics, okay? You have two kinds of charge, and then you have two kinds of force that behave differently in the charges, and here's an explanation of how that perfectly explains dipole actions. Why magnets do what they do, why they turn, why they do everything they do, why they attract and repel. The whole thing is explained, okay, completely. There's no leftover bits. There's no, oh, how there's something unexplained and too confusing. No. It fits the evidence quite perfectly. And no alternative theory ever has been able to do that. Ever. And if you say there's an alternative theory that explains magnetism, then show it to me. Show me the video. Idiot. Fucking piece of shit liar. Alright, even evolution you expect me to believe. Evolution you expect me to believe. So there's no hope of these sentences making sense. So I didn't know you were religious now. I'm wasting time on a kook. Evolution, you expect me to believe that it happened in a land far, far away in time a long time ago. Right, and it happened exactly how you said it happened. So I don't know whether you're using evolution as an analogy, but yes, I'm arguing that the universe had evolved into its current condition. It didn't arrive this way. So whatever. The fact is you're going over the same old arguments. Yeah, the fact is you're so fucking stupid that people have to do that. They have to just keep pointing out, oh, okay, so you're saying it's not a little bit bizarre that OJ cuts his finger worse, like a 10-year cut finger or a 20-year cut finger. So OJ, out of 20 years of days, okay, doesn't hack his finger to pieces. And it just happens that the night he cuts his finger to pieces, probably the worst finger cut he ever had, just happens to be on the night his wife's head falls off. Gee, and that's not a coincidence? That's not an interesting fact? Yeah, it is. All right, same old arguments. And for the same reason you got it right. Yes, that's the reason why I'm making these arguments, is because I think you're wrong and I think I'm right. And I think it's a decisive victory for me. Just insanely decisive. And it seems quite preposterous that I have to waste my time with this nonsense. The only reason you can claim to be right is because none of the people really know, so you have to prove it. So that makes a lot of not sense. The only reason you can claim to be right, the reason I can claim to be right is because I can survive all your attacks, because you don't make any. Okay, your spears have no points, your bullets have no velocity, you have nothing. Okay, but this vague notion, no, you're wrong, but I can't really point out how you're wrong. I mean, it's so lame. Is because none of the people really know. So again, there's lots of people saying they know. I mean, you know somehow that I'm wrong, even though you can't put it into any articulate language. So you have to prove it. And that's what these videos have done. That's what I've spent the last 7 years doing, is making rational arguments, pointing out why are you accepting this silly bent space-time bullshit, okay, when there's perfectly reasonable explanations for phenomenon. I mean, there is actual evidence for quantum entanglement. So this is amazing. Where's their actual evidence? The Allen aspect experiment, again, hasn't even been repeated. He claims to have special spinning mirror technology to do his amazing task of seeing the same photon, shooting a photon here called Jimmy, and catching the same photon over here, 19 meters away. He claims a feat he didn't prove. All right. So there's no proof. There's no actual evidence of quantum entanglement. If there's evidence of anything, there's evidence that there's right and left-handed gloves. They've never proven that there isn't right and left-handed gloves produced by atoms. And so, yes, if you find the right-handed glove, the left-handed glove went left. Right-handed gloves always go right, and left-handed gloves always go left. So if I find the right-handed glove, I know the left-handed glove's over there. They're always on opposite sides. I mean, fuck you, actual evidence of entanglement. No. But that just the wrong answer. No, I've pointed out why theoretically it's flawed theory. And I'll point it out again. I'll go over it again. I could give somebody the analogy of throwing frisbees. I could say to them, you want to bet? You want to make a wager throwing frisbees? Right? At jail bars. And I could tell that person it's like doing tic-tac-toe, right? If I get to go first, I automatically win, right? I can play the game that way. I go first, I automatically every time will win. Well, I can do the same thing with polarization. So I can find a sucker. Okay, and I'm saying science is basically being a sucker. They're so busy jumping the evidence, okay, that they don't pay any attention. And so you can 3-card Monty these people with tricks. And so the trick of polarization is if I choose, okay, to be the horizontal frisbee, I'll win every time. Because, yes, the horizontal frisbee every time won't get through the jail bars. But the vertical frisbee sometimes won't get through because it'll hit the bar. So it won't be 50-50. So the assumption of people is, it's 50-50, right? So I could fool somebody. I could say, you pick one, okay? That's, we're going to have, it's a 50-50 chance. So go ahead, pick one, vertical or horizontal. And I could fool people because they won't realize, one of them isn't 50-50. It's not heads and tails evenly. There are more heads than there are tails in this deck I've stacked, that nature stacked. So simple mistakes like that are the root of failure. All right. Prove it. I mean, there is actual evidence. No, there isn't. So why exactly is entanglement wrong? Well, as I just explained, the evidence is insanely weak. It requires performing a technical experiment that's impossible realistically. I mean, this whole idea that you're going to measure the handedness of a photon when it doesn't even have that property. They don't even know what polarization is, and yet they're using polarization okay, to decipher what something is. And they don't even know what that property is, what creates it or what causes it or what it manifests as. They think it has something to do with some wacky two field things, like, oh, the magnetic field's going this way and their electric field's going this way. Just complete crap. Alright, so I've explained why they're wrong and why the evidence is weak. It's again this inability to concede that the evidence is not at all decisive or at all complete or at all draws a clear equal sign to a conclusion. No way. Alright. Again, extraordinary claims should require at least ordinary evidence, and they don't even have that, let alone extraordinary evidence. So the light that first hits the earth hits at a point closest to the sun. So the light that first hits the earth hits at a point closest to the sun. If you want to measure distances, but every point on the sun is creating light in all directions at any one moment. So you have to understand the light is being created all over the sun from little tiny locations, and like a flashlight in a 1 minute, in 1 second the atom shoots a beam this way, 1 second it shoots a beam that way, 1 second it shoots a beam that way. Idiot, fool, creep. Anyway, alright, so the light that first hits the earth hits the point closest to the sun. Yes, some locations there'll be a tiny difference between when the light hits. So yes, the North Pole gets hit by light, you could argue, a little bit later than the equator. Then from that point spreading out like a wave. No, there's no waves anywhere. I mean, I have been so clear. I have no use for any kind of wave theory. I sit there and draw in this straight fucking line force. I've explained how Maxwell's drawings all straight line force. The lines of force are always straight lines emanating from the center of the gravity, if you want to call it that. Anyway, I would argue, fuck you would argue with fucking innuendos, slimy accusations you can't back up with a single piece of evidence. You're a slimy, cruddy piece of shit. That even if you're right, so here we go again, I'll concede that you're right and somehow do fuck you. That waves are a consequence of matter. So what does that even mean? Waves are a consequence of matter. What is that even? How can anybody even make any sense out of that? So you don't believe in electrons and protons? Because obviously matter is electrons and protons, shithead. Atoms are composite, emergent phenomena. The elemental bits are electrons and protons. How do electrons and protons create anything that's waving, shithead? Alright. But still we can measure the quanta of matter. So this doesn't even make any sense. I would argue that even if you're right, that waves are a consequence of matter, that is, they're emergent. So maybe he's arguing, oh yes, well, okay, I understand. There are no waves within the elemental. There's no elemental medium waving. Okay, he's conceding that. But still we can measure the quanta of matter. It's even smaller than light. So what did you measure that's smaller than light? Where did you do this measurement? Where? Please explain where you measured this smaller than light. Now, the only way it's smaller than light is I'm arguing that gravity is made of the same bits, okay, that light is made out of. Right? Same stuff. And light requires there to be at least 3, let's say, for us to measure the photon, because it has to hit and give the electron momentum for us to see it. We don't see photons. We see electrons move. Electrons have to move for our eye to say, photon hit me. That's it. This stuff is the smallest bits, and a thing we call a photon isn't one of these. No, it has to be at least 2 to make a frequency, but I would argue there has to be at least 3 for an electron to detect it, to be moved by it, to be hit hard enough to escape its tension. You have to compress the spring enough before the spring fights back. You have to compress it enough to shoot the little cork out of the gun. So, I think I've taken care of that crap. And it was crap. So no dealing with the argument again. Just show me. Post a link to the physics you say is done better than mine, that fits the evidence better, makes the more coherent, or and argues for a simpler universe than the one mine argues. So it wins. Mine wins Occam's razor. Mine wins on the subject of completeness, and mine certainly wins on the subject of unification. That is, it works for gravity, magnetism, electricity, all the phenomena, where theirs fails dismally. And by theirs, I mean any other theory. Alright. So, fuck you. Shit for brain, cunt bastard. We'll just remove it and see if you can reply with a fucking link, coward. Put your name on something. Say, I really believe this. And show me what you believe so I can rip it a new asshole. Piece of shit liars. Alright. So we'll just see if there's anything new. I don't think so. No, there isn't. See if there's anything here worth a damn. Probably not. There is just no conversation to be had. Nobody talking physics in any open way. I mean, this Sean Carroll, I should play this crap, but I mean, an hour and 50 minutes where he's going to attempt to defend not only the silliness of multiverse as the right answer, okay, to quantum mechanics, the creation of multiverses. He's going to somehow say multiverses explains gravity. This. So when something's falling, he's going to pretend now this is creating universes. I'm making universes. All kinds of universes. Oh, fuck. I mean, baby babble bullshit. Just so thick. You're just like, oh, this is pathetic. He's going to stake his reputation on defending something so fucking made up. It's such a silly, stupid answer to the why does the light be bended? Because there's a new universe for every possible path it took. I mean, what a pile of crap. I mean, it's so bad. I mean, you know, he doesn't seem like an irrational lunatic, but to stake his career on such a stupid fucking explanation. I mean, why not just say you're a god? Why does he just don't admit he's a closet god believer in her or something? It's just so fucking stupid. Alright, so let's do some of this fucking Bill Gates bullshit. So anyway, you know, he's out of the hospital, so it's good. He's got some sort of reoccurring parasitic, microbe infection that shows up. You know, one of those South American things that pretty much killed Darwin. I mean, he lived a long time, but I mean, ruined his life. I mean, just ruined it. You know, all those little worms and shit he picked up. Anyway, All right, so in here he's some guy is claiming, okay, hey Bill, you're really sort of full of shit. You got all these ropes, and you don't explain at all how they don't get tangled to shit. How I can walk through, I can walk, and all the atoms that are connected to all the atoms, somehow I'm not tangling up all those ropes. I'm not really affecting any of that shit. And how do these ropes deal with that? How can they understand that, oh, I don't mean anything by crossing through your rope? I mean, how do I collect all these ropes and not feel the drag? And how do I mean, it just doesn't really make any fucking goddamn sense. You can't tie everything together with goddamn rubber bands and say they don't get preposterously tangled. It's just nonsense. Anyway.
Sugary or sweet? Vinegary?
So he's turning that question into some sort of bullshit. Well, do you expect to smell the rope? No, he's not asking you whether the rope smells. He's asking you, how do you make your rope real and not have the consequence of the obvious consequence of insane amount of entanglements? Oh dear. Can't jump through this without failure. Here we go.
Of what by its very nature is intangible, unseeable.
Yes, okay, so fine. It's unseeable. We'll all concede that, but I'm just saying there's consequence to you making this mechanism, just like the consequences of creating an ether mechanism. You have to answer the question, well, how, like if you make it out of particles, they have to have a geometry of some kind. They're arranged in some way, and if you don't arrange them, you just have them randomly scattered all over the place, and they're going to exchange their pressure with each other or some sort of perturbation, then how does it maintain any straight line geometry? Which, again, the straight line is a fact of physics, okay? There's lots of straight lines.
So no, an object is not that which we can touch or see. An object is that which has shape.
So again, more nonsense. See, this is where definitions doesn't go anywhere. Somehow we have to give shape to something before you call it a something. No, all it has to do is be capable of being seen. That is, being seen in the sense that it leaves an impact. A footprint is an object. The displacement of the sand. All of that stuff is real stuff in the universe. So it's just making a recognition that something's different. So an object is really just recognizing cup isn't cement mixer. Cup isn't Donald Duck. I mean, it's just recognizing differences between things, that it has distinctly different properties, and now it's an object.
I say that Mother Nature is using a rope to do her fancy footwork, or invisible.
And the rope is essentially, by his theory, a rubber band. So it's just string theory. It's just rubber band theory. The rope is providing some sort of tension between the objects, and somehow the photon is the tension moving through the rope because you twisted it, and that moved things together, or you twist it the opposite way and moves them apart. But that doesn't really happen in the real world, and so it doesn't explain charge. It doesn't explain anything. So it's just not a viable theory. A bunch of crap.
Flexible. Because typically something that is not made out of too many parts, at least, gets more rigid and more rigid. If it's made out of a single piece, we imagine it completely rigid. And that's not the case here. And again, we have to imitate her world.
Well, it's not the case in any medium we know. So again, they're creating an ether out of something that doesn't have any correlate in the real world, in the sense that there isn't anything that's not made of particles. Mediums are particles. Water is made of molecules. We know that it's the molecules that get compressed. They get pushed closer together. The sound going through a piece of steel, we know that it's the atomic bits that are vibrating, moving the vibration through the steel. Again, it has to do with the atoms, the shape of the atoms changing. So it has to be made out of some sort of structure, and there's no structure for the ether.
Not ours, not the one we want. And that's where people find, a little problems. A few of the problems. They have trouble accepting these assumptions. And that's what they are. They're assumptions. Okay?
Yeah, well, I should even go back to the subject of the stupid interferometer and the stupid gravity waves, because there's so many things that don't make any sense, right? Where they're trying to say that there's a compression and then an expansion, when gravity can't do that. In the sense that all it can do is create this much pressure, and then there's this much, and then there's this much, and then there's this much. But it's not the opposite. Like there's not it stretches in one thing and then it expands in the other one and then it reverses and the two do the opposite thing. None of that opposite stuff is happening. There's no trigger in the mechanism of just rotating that creates any opposites. It's not going to invert anything. It's just 5 volts, 4 volts, 5 volts, 4 volts. It's not 5 volts minus 5 volts plus 5 volts minus 5 volts. That's not happening, and that's the model they're using. They're pretending it's 5 volts minus 5 volts when that's not what the gravity wave can produce.
We have to imitate her rope. We have to make it invisible. We have to make it untouchable. We cannot prove the existence of the thread or of the rope by going to the lab. There's no experiment you can run. The only way...
Well, I mean, you can do these deductive experiments, and again, you can create a model with ropes and then say, what happens if I walk through the ropes? There's a million other ropes, and then I have a bunch of ropes tangled on me, and what if I just swirl around a couple of times? Don't all the ropes get all swirly? And nothing's we're going to recognize. There's no muscle memory or any kind of memory for how many times I swirled around. So if there were real ropes, then wouldn't the number of swirls be in the rope somewhere and you could just unswirl me? We're not ink in jello. Yeah, I mean, you can't undo.
Approach the thread, the only way to approach the rope, pulling back, close your eyes, and use your mind. Use your brain.
Well, I'm sorry, I've done that, and I can't make the differences in the phenomenon. I can't make your rope do that. First, I can't make the rope push. That doesn't make any sense. If I untangle it, it's not rigid, so how can it push two things apart? And then, again, how does it recognize the difference between the charges, and how does it create the magnetic dipole? This whole idea of the rope swinging around in space like a jump rope, okay, and that the two jump ropes come into each other, and somehow that makes repulsion, and then somehow if the ropes are going opposite, that's attraction. How does that make any sense? How does that force seem anywhere proportional? The attraction is weak. Magnets are really strong. How does that make any sense to you when you imagine it? How do you make that make sense? What's turning the ropes? Jump ropes require energy. You'll lose your breath, jump rope. It takes work.
You have to visualize. That's all you can do. Okay?
Where's the energy come from?
Zeroed in or
yeah, that's right. Sorry, yeah, you're the only guy with any imagination. Well, you're the only one who has this imagination. That's right. You made the best, whatever, Brer Rabbit story. And everybody else was making Brer Pig stories instead. But yeah, okay. So what? It's story, and it's stupid.
Light, gravity, all these things with particles.
Yeah, so again, you're saying it can't be done, and yet I did it, frankly. All right, so the weakness of the particle model is just a subtle weakness. I mean, all you need to, like I said, it's just a charge problem. And so once you understand that the particles are already moving and all you're doing is changing where they're moving, that a magnet doesn't make energy. It just filters the energy that's already in the environment. It just filters it. That's it. And it works perfectly as an explanation. So they just didn't have the last little bit. So yes, their particle model doesn't work because they didn't find the right elements to put in it to make it work. But it's a hell of a lot closer than your model of silly.
Oh, and then they gave up on that. They said we can't explain it with particles. That's where we are today with particles. So particles cannot explain it. The rope can explain it.
So again, it does mock gravity is particles. Particles explains gravity. It creates a drag problem, but the drag problem is a real problem. It does exist. Electrons and protons experience drag. In every experiment where you use electrons and protons, you will find them dragging to a halt. You will find them always in the process of deceleration. The moment you stop accelerating them, they start decelerating.
And all these invisible phenomena. Okay, let's move on here. We have another gentleman, and he was a lot kinder. He says, "Damn, Bill, I know you're getting dumber by the day. Your a number of reasons of science is hilarious. I'll just pick one. Observability, for instance. You say it isn't science, so in that respect, a blind man can be a scientist. Correct. A blind man can be a scientist."
Well, again, his definitions just aren't very useful. Pointing out that we need to have some sort of solid definitions for something versus a nothing and all this other kind of stuff, some kind of rules of language is right. And again, as I've just pointed out with the conversation about gravity, because of the bad language and even the word photon, the idea that you're going to call a collection of quanta a single thing, all right, is dangerous and stupid. But we're stuck, just like Benjamin Franklin picking positive and negative wrong, and they just can't fix any of this language, and it's not a bad language. The speed of light when it's really the speed of force. I mean, lots of stuff that gets in the way.
Scientists, right? Dude, if you can't observe it, how the hell would you even know it's there? If you can't see to observe something, how the hell would you even know it exists? Uh-huh.
Right, so we know things leave fingerprints, things leave footprints, things leave trails, things leave an effect. So a piece of energy was going this way, now the energy is going that way. Clearly, they can be measured, the fact that it was anticipated that would be there. So if I take one of the rolls of the roulette wheel, and I just take that roll and pretend it didn't happen, statistically, moving that out will show itself. Dissecting a roll changes, in a way that can be perceived, the expected permutation results. I mean, obviously it has to be, there's a limit to our ability to see how how much change the system has. We have to be able to see a certain amount of change to detect it. But we're certainly able to see pretty small changes. I mean, the technology is pretty impressive. We have lots of data.
Well, there's a lot of words actually used there. All of them are objected to by rational science. And here's the list one more time. And let's see if I can make that a little smaller.
I mean, all there really is, observe is the key thing, and you observe not only with your eyes, but with instruments. Okay, a study just doesn't mean anything. Collecting data is the same thing as observing. Analyzing is just doing the processing. That is, where did the two facts point? Measure, again, is just observing. Equations are personally reasonable. So these are the things he's saying there's no good. So here's over here. Persuade, convince, convert, recruit, believe, inform. So where's inform in here? You're just informing people, right? I mean, I didn't know that the gravitational wave observatory was reflecting the photon back and forth 300 times. It's an important fact. I didn't know it. And so that's a really important thing, is being able to be informed about what the actual truth is, rather than the fake story you're told. So the actual truth is that they've never done photon detection experiments in the double slit. And I don't even think they've done them with electrons. I don't even think they've even attempted to detect electrons. They've never done the experiment, yet they tell us what the results of the experiment are, when they never did it. Those are facts, that's information, and that's what you use. And the information is basically saying to you, you have two things over here, you have two things over there. you have a word called for that fits that perfectly. 2 plus 2, and you have a word for. And so you can do the math. And that's all the logic is really doing. You're just combining things that you know to be similar. So you're doing a kind of calculus, a kind of derivative, where you're just saying, well, hippopotamus is kind of rhinoceros with a horn. Okay, close enough. So how many hippopotamuses it would take to knock a building down? It's probably going to be the same answer, or very close, for how many rhinoceroses would it take to knock down a building. So you can do these kind of derivatives by replacing things you know to be very similar or very like. Well, anyway, I'm not going to explain. I mean, there's no point in explaining logic to people who fucking resist using any of it. Obeying where the facts lead, not where the story, what story is the most interesting or pretty. Look at the pretty little body thingy, blow up thingy. It's pretty.
Everybody just says, well, it's not a thing. But that's an antonym. You can't define in terms of synonyms or antonyms. Because what is a something? Is it not a nothing?
Well, a pattern is a something, a footprint is a something, the absence of something is the same as the presence of something, okay, so that's just the way it works. It only works one way, right? You can't prove nothing with a field of nothing, but you can certainly prove the difference between something and nothing if you have something. Something gives you something to contrast. Nothing doesn't give you anything to contrast. So, a field of something will make you able to see nothing. And vice versa won't work. Or however you want to think of vice versa. Something can create white space. And the white space can show you void. Something missing.
They're all thinking in the same term. They say, what part of your rope theory can you hand over to an engineer and have him build something that would manipulate the ropes? See, they want to touch it. They say, I want to touch your rope. I don't want to...
No, I want to see the model working, and your descriptions of the models working is stupid. I mean, you tie a rope around a donkey's neck and then say, I'm pulling the donkey, when in fact the donkey is only experiencing a pushing on its neck. You're pushing the donkey. So, I mean, you can't even get the... You can't model anything reasonable. Again, your explanation for magnetism is just ludicrous, that somehow magnets are constantly throwing their ropes, and that somehow when two jump ropes meet each other, it creates some sort of incredible fucking force that causes the effect of magnetism, when the amount of attraction or repulsion that's going to be created by spinning ropes is going to be tiny compared to the amount of energy it took you to spin the fucking rope. So where did all the energy come from? You don't account for any of it. So yeah, your model doesn't work.
Is that an object has to be tangible and visible. That is not the case. An object is just that which has shape. We don't use science for anything. We don't use it to make gadgets.
So again, it doesn't shape. It's just shape is what, any particular frozen moment in space. It has shape. I suppose everything sort of has to, but it certainly is possible that the universe itself doesn't have a shape. I mean, I would argue it probably does. It's spherical. It's a bubble, and it's reflecting the energy back into the bubble. That's why it continues to function, is because it doesn't outgas. It doesn't exhaust itself. But anyway.
The electricity that's flowing around in the universe, nobody tells me what their atom looks like. And if their atom is made out of beads, how can you...
Yeah, well, you haven't shown me your atom either. From one minute you say these ropes go from atom to atom, and then you imply that they're from electron to electron, and then proton to proton. I mean, you're not giving me a model either. What does your atom look like? And again, if you're gonna take away the electron and the proton as a model, then how are you going to make charge? Because frankly, those are the monopoles of magnetism and charge. Without them, you got nothing. You got no electricity and magnetism without electrons and protons. Alright, it's probably enough of this horse shit. Let's just jump ahead.
To the statement, it's absolute nonsense. You can see Newton's, the main part of his equation, mass 1 times mass 2 divided by distance squared. And that's his force equation. And that's how you would figure out, for example, weight. If you wanted to figure out the weight, you would use something, like the weight of the Earth versus the Sun. Well, you would use his formula. That's what it's used for. Okay.
Well, he didn't. He took out the gravitational constant, the G. But anyway, so again, as I stated, it's not a very precise way to measure the effect that objects have, because there's two effects. There's what you're producing, how you change the field, and there's how the other object changed the field. Obviously, their changes are going to affect you, your changes are going to affect it. And that kind of has to be understood. It's not just one field effect, it's two field effects that are in fact different. Different sized objects, different objects with different amounts of stuff to move will create a different field. Like the sun creates more gravity than the earth does because it has greater mass, more stuff to affect the field. Alright, anyway. So, enough of a video, I say. Okay, so till the next time and such. Haven't said so recently. I do hate this fucking planet. It just sucks. Planet is shit for brains. Alright. Shit. I don't deserve to be on your fucking retarded bus.